Picture a man who has trained for 15 years. He knows what he is doing. He warms up. He tracks his lifts. He eats well. He sleeps. By every modern standard, he is doing everything right. And one Tuesday morning, he reaches down to pull a deadlift he has pulled 100 times before, and something tears. It is not a muscle or a minor strain. Instead, it is a tendon. The kind of injury that puts you on a table, requires surgery, and takes 6 months of rehab before you can train properly again. And the worst part? His doctor tells him it was not really the lift that did it. It had been building for years. Here is a fact that most people who train never hear. Muscle tissue, under the right stimulus, shows measurable structural change in as little as 8 days. 8 days. You can feel it working within a week. But tendons, the thick cables of collagen that connect every muscle in your body to every bone, take a minimum of 8 to 12 weeks to begin showing structural adaptation. Sometimes longer. That gap is the problem. When you train hard, your muscles get stronger faster than your tendons can keep up. And for the first few years of training, you never notice, because the tendons you have are strong enough to handle the loads your muscles are producing. But somewhere around your mid-30s, that gap starts to show. Your muscles have been outpacing your connective tissue for a decade, and one day, on a perfectly ordinary lift, the bill comes due. This is not rare. Achilles tears, patellar tendon ruptures, bicep tendon detachments. These injuries cluster heavily in men between 35 and 50 who have trained consistently for years. And they are not beginners. They are people who know how to train, but people who just trained the wrong thing. Now here is where the Greeks come in. Because this problem, muscles outpacing tendons, was essentially absent in elite Greek athletes. Men like Milo of Croton wrestled competitively for 24 years without a career-ending injury. Leonidas of Rhodes won sprinting events at 36 years old. These men were producing enormous amounts of force in physically demanding competition across decades, and their connective tissue held up. The Greeks had 4 specific habits woven into their daily training that directly targeted the tendons, the connective tissue, and the fascial system underneath the muscle. And each one of those habits is backed by modern sports science in ways that should make you look at your current training very differently. If you train, and you want to still be training in 10, 15, 20 years without your body falling apart, this is the most useful thing you will watch this week. The first habit starts not with a weight and not with a machine. It starts under their feet. Think about the last time you trained. The floor underneath you was almost certainly flat, rubber, and completely stable. It was engineered that way on purpose, to remove variables, protect joints, and keep everything predictable. That stability feels safe, and for your muscles, it mostly is. But for your tendons, it is one of the quietest problems in modern training. The Greeks accidentally solved this problem before it could begin. Not with a special exercise, but with the ground they trained on, because they trained on sand. Every gymnasium in ancient Greece, the palaestra where athletes trained daily, had a designated sand pit called the scamma. Athletes ran in it, jumped in it, wrestled in it, and performed their loaded exercises in it. They were barefoot, always. No sandals, no shoes, nothing between the sole of the foot and the shifting, unpredictable surface underneath. And here is why that matters far more than it sounds. When you run or lift on a stable, flat surface, your tendons and stabilizer muscles do a fraction of the work they are capable of. The surface handles part of the job for them. But sand gives nothing back. Every step, every landing, every planted foot has to be controlled entirely by the connective tissue in your ankles, your calves, your knees, and your hips. The tendons are doing constant, micro-level stabilization work across angles that a rubber floor never demands. Research published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning. Research found that athletes who incorporated unstable surface training showed significantly greater increases in tendon stiffness and connective tissue thickness compared to those who trained exclusively on stable surfaces, even when the total training load was matched. The tendons were being asked to work harder, from more angles, and they responded by growing stronger in all of them. The Greeks were doing this every single day without knowing the mechanism. But sand training was only the foundation. The second habit is where the load comes in, and it looks nothing like modern weightlifting. In 1994, archaeologists confirmed what historians had suspected for years. A sandstone block found near Olympia, weighing 143 kilograms, carries an inscription on its surface. The inscription says Bybon, son of Fola, lifted me overhead with one hand. One hand, 143 kilograms. Now, most people hear that and think about raw strength, but think instead about what that lift demands from the connective tissue. A barbell loaded to 143 kilograms is perfectly symmetrical. The weight is distributed evenly across both hands, across a balanced bar, in a fixed path of motion. Your tendons work hard, but they work hard in one specific direction. A rough stone, irregular in shape, lifted overhead with a single arm, is a completely different challenge. The connective tissue has to stabilize from every angle simultaneously, compensating for the asymmetry, the unpredictable weight distribution, the shifting center of gravity as the stone moves overhead. This is what researchers now call multi-planar loading. A study in 2017 by Mersman and colleagues, published in the Journal of Applied Physiology, confirmed that muscle tendon imbalance, meaning muscles significantly stronger than the tendons they attach to, is the single most consistent predictor of tendon injury in trained athletes. Asymmetrical, varied loading closes that imbalance, and symmetrical barbell training on its own does not. The Greeks were lifting stones, carrying amphorae, and swinging halteres in rotating arcs across their bodies. Every load was slightly different. Every repetition demanded a slightly different stabilization pattern. Their connective tissue was being trained from every angle, every session, for years. Your tendons adapt to exactly the stresses you place on them, and nothing more. If every load you lift follows the same path, your tendons get strong in that path and nowhere else. That is the gap the Greeks never had. But here's what's interesting. The two habits we've covered so far, the sand and the asymmetrical loading, built the foundation. What came next in Greek training was the habit that actually built tendon stiffness at a deep structural level. For decades, sports scientists assumed the best way to build tendon strength was eccentric loading, the slow, controlled lowering phase of a lift. And it helps, but when researchers started measuring tendon stiffness directly, they kept finding something they didn't expect. The most powerful stimulus wasn't the lowering. It wasn't even the lifting. It was the holding. Sustained, high-tension positions held under load for extended periods. And the Greeks had been doing exactly that, on a sand floor with another man trying to throw them down. In ancient Greece, wrestling was not optional. Every male athlete trained it as a daily physical practice. The palaestra was built specifically for it. Young men arrived in the morning, oiled their skin, dusted themselves with fine sand so their bodies could be gripped, and spent hours grappling. And they weren't the only ones. Philosophers wrestled. Mathematicians wrestled. Even physicians wrestled. Plato himself was named after his wrestling coach, and the name Plato reportedly came from the Greek word for broad, referring to his wide shoulders built from years of grappling. Now, most people look at wrestling and think of it as cardio, endurance, maybe functional strength. What they miss is what wrestling specifically demands from the connective tissue, and it's something no barbell exercise can fully replicate. When two wrestlers lock up, they hold positions. A dominant grip held for 20 seconds while the opponent tries to break it. A body lock maintained under pressure. A neck clinch resisted while the other man tries to drive forward. These are sustained, high-tension, isometric contractions, not explosive movements, not full ranges of motion, but fixed positions held under significant load for extended periods. And it turns out that is exactly what tendons respond to most powerfully. Research from the University of Tokyo, published in the Journal of Physiology, directly compared long-duration isometric contractions to short, rapid contractions for tendon adaptation. The finding was clear. Isometric holds of 20 seconds or more produced significantly greater increases in tendon stiffness than rapid, shorter contractions performed at equal total exercise volume. The tendon was responding to time under tension in a way that explosive movement simply could not replicate. Tendon. Stiffness is not a bad thing. It is the goal. A stiffer tendon transmits force more rapidly from muscle to bone, which means more of your strength actually reaches what you are trying to move. And a stiffer tendon is dramatically more resistant to tearing under sudden load. The tear at 40 almost always happens in tendons that are relatively compliant, tendons that have been loaded explosively for years, without being given sustained, held tension to adapt to. Then, in 2015, researcher Ebony Rio published a study that confirmed something even more striking. 5 sets of 45-second isometric holds performed at 70% of maximum voluntary contraction reduced tendon pain significantly and did something that pain medication cannot do. It reduced corticospinal inhibition. In plain terms, when a tendon is damaged or under stress, the nervous system puts a brake on the muscles around it to prevent further injury. Isometric holds released that brake. The tendon started functioning properly again because the nervous system had been retrained to trust it. Greek wrestlers were doing 5, 6, 7 hours of sustained isometric grappling every week. Their tendons were being loaded in exactly the way modern research says is most effective for building stiffness, thickness, and resilience. And here is what should concern you. Almost no modern training program includes deliberate long-duration isometric holds. Most gym programs are built around concentric and eccentric movements, the push and the pull. The held position is either ignored or treated as a brief pause between repetitions. The Greeks held positions that would make most trained athletes today tap out within 30 seconds. And their tendons were, quite literally, built differently as a result. But the habit that might surprise you most is the one that happened after every single session. It is the reason Greek athletes could sustain that training load across decades without breaking down. After training, every Greek athlete performed the same ritual. They stood in the late afternoon sun, skin covered in olive oil and dust, and drew a curved bronze blade slowly across their body from shoulder to ankle. The tool was called a strigal. It scraped away the oil, the sweat, and the sand from the scama, and historians assumed for centuries that this was simply how Greeks cleaned themselves before bathing. But apparently, it was not only that. A study published in 2010 by Nomikos and colleagues, examining the physiological effects of the strigal technique and olive oil application on soft tissue, found something that reframes the entire ritual. The combination of oil and sustained mechanical pressure applied along muscle and tendon lines is a direct form of fascial manipulation. The fascia, the dense fibrous connective tissue that wraps around every muscle, every tendon, and every organ in your body, is an active part of the movement system. When it becomes restricted through repeated loading without maintenance, it limits how efficiently tendons can glide and transmit force. More critically, tendons have one of the lowest blood supplies of any tissue in the body. That is why they heal so slowly when injured. That is why they take months to adapt when trained. And that is why anything that increases blood flow to tendon tissue, even temporarily, has a meaningful effect on recovery and long-term resilience. The daily strigal ritual did exactly that. Mechanical pressure applied consistently increased localized circulation to the connective tissue. The olive oil reduced friction on the fascia, allowing it to glide more freely. This was not done occasionally or when something hurt. It happened every single day as a non-negotiable part of the training process. In this way, the Greeks were essentially preventing injuries by maintaining the fascial system before it had a chance to restrict. So what does all of this mean for you today? You do not need a sandpit or a 143-kilogram boulder, but you do need the principles, because the principles are what the biology actually responds to. The first habit is to introduce unstable surface work. Barefoot training on grass, sand, or an uneven surface for even 15 minutes before your regular session begins helps rebuild the connective tissue adaptation that flat rubber floors suppress. Your ankles, your calves, your knees, everything from the foot up starts doing real stabilization work again. The second habit is to add asymmetrical loading. One arm carries, single arm pressing, uneven grip work. Load your connective tissue from angles it has not been trained in. The gap between your muscle strength and your tendon strength closes when the tendons are forced to work across multiple planes, not just one. The third habit is to hold positions. After your main lifts, hold the hardest part of the movement for 20 to 45 seconds. A wall sit, an isometric deadlift pull against pins, a static lunge hold. Time under sustained tension is the most direct stimulus for tendon stiffness, and most training programs contain almost none of it. Isometrics are especially potent. The fourth habit is to maintain the fascia. 10 minutes of targeted soft tissue work after every session with a foam roller, a massage ball, or genuine manual pressure along the lines of your major tendons. Not aggressive stretching. Slow, sustained pressure that increases blood flow to tissue that barely gets any. These 4 habits did not give Greek athletes extraordinary genetics. They gave them connective tissue that could actually handle the demands being placed on it for decades, not just years. The tear at 40 is not inevitable. It is the result of training that builds one thing while quietly neglecting another. The Greeks built both at the same time. Every session, without ever separating them. That is a habit worth taking from them. If this video shifted how you think about training, there is one more thing worth your time. I put together a guide that goes much deeper than any single video can. It is about what is quietly happening to the modern male body, including testosterone, energy, and drive, and the 5 areas of daily life that research consistently shows are the levers that fix it. Nutrition, sleep, movement, recovery, and mindset. The link is in the description. If you have watched this far, it was written for you.